As I travel around the country, so many Americans ask me, how did we go so wrong in Iraq? Now, there are those who will offer up some easy answers. They'll say that Iraq is George Bush's war. It's all his fault. Or that Iraq was botched because of the arrogance and incompetence of Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney. Or that we would have gotten Iraq right if we had went in with more troops, or if there had only been a stronger Iraqi prime minister. Now, these are all easy answers. And like most answers, they're partially true. But they don't tell the whole truth, because they overlook a harder and more fundamental truth. And the hard truth is that the war in Iraq is not about a catalog of many mistakes. It's about one big mistake. The war in Iraq should have never been authorized and should have never been waged. Should have never been fought. But the conventional thinking in Washington, it has a way of buying into stories that make political sense even if they don't make common sense. So at the time in Washington, we were told that the only way to prevent Iraq from getting a nuclear weapon was through military force. Some leading Democrats echoed the administration's erroneous line that there was a connection between Saddam Hussein and al-Qaeda, which proved not to be true, and people knew at the time, or should have known at the time, was not true. So the American people weren't just failed by a president who rushed to war. They were failed by much of Washington, by a media that all too often reported spin instead of facts, by a foreign policy elite that largely boarded the bandwagon for war, and most of all by a Congress, a co-equal branch of government that voted to give the president the open-ended authority to wage a war that he uses to this day. So let's just be clear. Without that vote, there would be no war. Some seek to rewrite history. They argue that they weren't really voting for the war, they were voting for inspectors, or they were voting for diplomacy. But the Congress, the administration, the media, and the American people all understood what we were debating in the fall of 2002. This was a vote about whether or not to go to war. Y'all knew that, didn't you? That's the truth, that we all understood it then, and as we need to understand it now. We need to ask those who voted for that war, how can you give the president a blank check and then be surprised when he decides to cash it?